Excited again to be part of this telebriefing. And as you can see, we've got basically breaking news that we're sharing here on the telebriefing. So the next guest speaker that I'm going to introduce is Michael Vu, who's our Registrar of Voters for the county. We're so happy to have him joining us today. Michael, if you could start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, your department, and your role in the COVID-19 response.
Thanks, Michelle. Let me just say I am a county employee that I've been working here for the past 14 years. I was acting as the assistant registrar for approximately 6 years before becoming the registrar. But what does the Registrar of Voters office does? Well, I think it kind of says it in its name, which is we conduct the elections on behalf of the entire county, all 1.84 million registered voters that we have in our county. And that goes from anything from this upcoming presidential race all the way down to things like your water district, your fire protection district elections that we have. In fact, we're trying to tighten it up now as we are 67 days away from the election, as we call it at the Registrar of Voters office, E-67. But really, it's not just E-67. We are, frankly, 38 days away from sending every single registered voter in our county a mail ballot. So in this upcoming election, there are a number of different changes. Our staff is currently, generally, it's 68, nearly 70 individuals, but we grow the staff of over 1,200 seasonal staff members that we have brought on aboard when we conduct a statewide election like we're going to go into in this upcoming election. And that's not including the thousands of poll workers that we need to help us and voters out there on election day. And in this upcoming election, as I will demonstrate and present out, is there are some major changes that everyone, particularly in their rural communities, but everyone in our county should be aware of, because a shift like what we're doing is pretty major, and all of that is as a result of the pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, we've got two major changes that are going to be happening. One is every single registered voter is going to be sent a mail ballot. And then the second question that I often get is are there going to be any polling places as a result of sending everyone a mail ballot? And the answer to that question is yes. So Michelle, I'm not quite sure if you want me to launch right into my presentation, if that's all right, or if you had a series of questions that you wanted to ask.
No, so yeah, you can please go ahead and share your presentation, and then after you're done, we will have a few questions, kind of depending on time. We'll have a few follow-up questions to ask you. So yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So for those of you that are watching and listening in, you know, the pandemic, if we go back to March 3rd, which was the presidential primary election, boy, were we pretty fortunate not having to deal with the pandemic at that respective time. We were able to conduct an election where we had 1,548 precincts out there, approximately 7,000 poll workers that assisted us during that election. And again, we didn't have to really feel the full effects of it as we were trying to administratively handle the elections for everyone. So we were pretty fortunate that who would have ever thought that by pushing up the presidential primary election from generally a June election timeframe to a March, that it would actually benefit California in general, not in the way of just getting a high-profile candidates to come through our state, but also the fact that we weren't going to have questions or confusion about how to vote in the election. So we were pretty fortunate in that respect. But what voters may not know is that shortly after the election, we have a 30-day period to count all timely cast ballots, certify the accuracy of it within that 30-day period, and then move on and proceed with the November election. So shortly after the March 3rd election, probably maybe a week after the election, we got the orders from the governor saying everyone should shelter at home. But our office didn't. Of course, our office is a critical infrastructure in the eyes of the federal government. We were designated as a critical infrastructure after the 2016 presidential election. And so our office remained here, all of us remained here as we were working through to count every single ballot, to verify every single ballot that needed to be counted and tabulated into our our voting system before we could certify the election. Thank goodness is, as I mentioned, when you have approximately 1,200 individuals packed in like sardines here at the building, and you have now this requirement of social distancing of 6 feet, we were impacted by the pandemic that really the majority of the population didn't get to see or experience, but internally we had to really grapple with how are we going to ever be able to certify this on time and do so while keeping all of our staff safe and healthy, but also know that there are the opportunities for the public to come in and observe the process as well, and how do we keep them safe and healthy and allow for meaningful observation, but also allow our folks to count and verify ballots as we proceeded with certifying the election. So we were also fortunate the fact that we got to see other jurisdictions having to conduct their presidential primary or a primary election under the cloud of a pandemic. And so we got some lessons learned there. And that's one of the things, a couple of things that I wanted to show and provide to all of you. So let me go ahead and share my presentation with all of you. Hopefully all of you can see that. So after the March election, shortly after that time frame, the Secretary of State's office gathered a number of elections officials and advocacy groups, legislative representatives, governor's office representatives together and formed a task group. I was on that task group shortly after even before we certified the election, because everyone's sight was now over the November election and how were we going to ever be able to conduct the election under this pandemic, where COVID-19 and this virus was spreading. And they recognized, as well as we did, is that we needed to be decisive and we needed to be clear and we need to be timely in allowing local elections officials like myself and our teams across the other 57 counties sufficient time to prepare for the election. When you have this pandemic and you're preparing years in advance for an election of the size that we're going to have and experience, and to just really throw that out the window, because how are we going to recruit enough poll workers? How are we going to get enough polling places to have in a traditional environment? Well, you really can't. And I'll explain that here in just a second or two as to the reasons why. But once all the conversations happened that was going on between all these different stakeholders, decisions needed to be made. There was a lot of conversations going back and forth. A lot of disagreements were happening as to how to even prepare for this upcoming November election, about what opportunities or options elections officials should have to be able to conduct it. But ultimately, the main goal was time. For me, it was time and certainty. Again, we could not burn any more daylight than we were, as I mentioned, because we had already had certain plans in place and the infrastructure in place to prepare for it. And something that would take 4 to 6, maybe even 8 to 10 years to change the model of an election is now happening in 4 to 6 months, if that, based off of the time frame of the March-April time frame that we had as these were discussed. But once the decisions were made, the governor came out with 2 executive orders. The legislature proposed a couple of bills and got them through. We were then able to wrap our arms around now, not just from the conceptual side, but ultimately, how are we going to operationalize these requirements and what options should we exercise? So for us, we put a set of goals out there. Not only is it paramount that the public has confidence in San Diego County elections officials to have an election that they could have integrity, utmost integrity, but transparency, accuracy, security around it, which everyone expects of our office. But now how do we balance that with keeping everyone healthy and safe? And that is a big component. It's already difficult and complex enough to prepare for a giant election as we're going to have. But now how do we do this when we have to physical distance? We have to provide all the respective personal protective equipment that we have to now dissect every aspect of a movement of people through the system, which happens every election period, but by huge numbers during a presidential general election. So we came out with these respective goals that you see here. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, is that what will happen? Every single registered voter is going to be receiving a mail ballot, and there will be in-person or polling places on election day, but there will be fewer of them. And I'll explain that what the trade-off is there, that they will be running longer as opposed to just on election day. But we need to really educate the public about these respective changes. And so we launched into a robust campaign and outlined a robust campaign, and still working on that campaign as we are thinking of all the shifts and changes that are happening on a national level, and how we want to make sure that when it comes at the end of the day, no voter in San Diego County is surprised about how this election will be conducted. And as a result of that comes this logo that you see here. We've launched into our own respective campaign, Vote Safer San Diego. There are going to be over 600 candidates that will be on the ballot running a campaign. We too are running our campaign over this, this campaign called Vote Safer San Diego, which ultimately its focus is vote your mail ballot and only use your polling place as an alternative, voting that mail ballot should you need to. So what are the impacts? As we talked about, why are we making these respective changes and why the responses, as Michelle talked about? Well, for us, two major impacts to our office. Again, as I've talked with you about before, the state and local officials running a traditional neighborhood polling place knows that how are we going to ever recruit enough poll workers, and how are we ever going to get enough polling locations to open up their place for voting purposes? And in terms of the polling places, are they big enough for social distancing? And so those were the two major impacts. That is effectively to run a well-run, successful election under a neighborhood polling place environment. This is your bread and butter. This is ultimately how elections are going to get conducted for voters that are traditionally accustomed to going to their neighborhood polling place. And now that's changing. That is now changing on voters, and it's so important to get this information out, and why we're going into such a informative stage of getting this information out to voters. But for you that are listening in, I want to kind of get you through this storyline of what was happening in our office and why we ended up having to take the time before we could launch into this campaign. As you can see here from a data perspective, is that when you think about our 9,000 poll workers that we were planning on recruiting to serve on election day for the November 3rd election, you can see from the March election that of the poll workers that served, 30% were in this high risk 65 plus age group. This is also a big population for us in terms of those that would serve as a poll worker. So how are we going to grapple with that uncertainty in terms of bringing on people to serve as a poll worker for our office, and then ultimately serve voters on election day without having an interruption or frankly confusion or chaos, because perhaps there's not sufficient number of people that would be available on election day. But I just really don't want to stop there, because if you look at that 30%, you look at the 64%, but then you look at the other side of the equation, which is our 16 to 19-year-olds, you can see that though that is a second highest population of poll workers that serve as a poll worker for our office. And how are they impacted? Well, they're not sheltering, but they're remote distance learning right now. Many of them are. Now I know that some of these school districts are going to be opening up, but there creates a level of uncertainty there about how many high school poll workers can serve in this upcoming election. And so when you combine those respective numbers together, now we're over at 50% of our poll worker population that could we ever even conduct the election, get off the ground in terms of getting sufficient people to serve voters and their community. From a data perspective, when it comes down to polling locations, let's look at that really quickly. That 1,548 precincts that we had in March's election, as you can see here, many of those locations are private facilities that we have, that we use. Garages, small businesses, pizza parlors. You know, we do use schools from a public side of the equation, as well as government facilities. But by far, the largest population of our polling places are private facilities, which are generally too small because it is traditionally a neighborhood polling place format. You only need so many square feet of space to be able to conduct it for your respective smaller community that is out there. So that has a level of uncertainty. When I talk about learning lessons from other counties in other parts of the country when they were having and conducting their primary elections under the cloud of the pandemic. We saw situations where the private facilities said yes, and then when the pandemic occurred, they said no to those election officials, no to their voters, because either it was too much of a liability or because the site was just too small to facilitate the election in terms of square feet. So where does that play for us in terms of the factors associated with what we're focusing on for the November's election? First of all, confidence and availability is key, and certainty. Certainty in people, certainty of places. And for us was, if we focus on the public facilities that are out there, once we are able to secure them, we know that they're more secure than the private facilities. We don't want the private, and don't get me wrong, the private facilities, they have been so gracious throughout the years that we've been conducting elections. But this one is one of those situations where we cannot afford a level of uncertainty. We're an event-driven organization, and we have to know that this November 3rd election is going to come. And there's no stopping it, there's no suspending it, there's no delaying it. It's coming, and we need to make sure that we are well prepared to ensure that voters are confident that this is going to be their respective place to go to election day, or now the days leading up to it, which I'll hold off in just a split second of what I mean by that. 2,000 square feet in space is the locations that we're looking at for this upcoming election. When we're looking at public facilities or any facilities, we're looking at no less than 2,000 square feet of space. Now, we also have to think about and contend and think about our diverse geography, and not just in population, but geography itself. The 4,500, 5,000 square miles of space that we have in our county, from urban to rural, unincorporated cities, population density. When we think about accessibility, not just accessibility for people with disabilities and voters with disabilities, but accessibility in terms of transportation corridors, population densities, socioeconomic status that are out there. All the factors that come into play to ensure that voters have access to these respective sites, or all the various options so they can exercise this fundamental right of voting. And then finally, this technical term that I have here on the slide, which is the election structure. Many of you may know that you get a ballot with a specific set of contests that are on that ballot. For us, what you don't see is that in this upcoming election, there's 842 different variations of that ballot, what we call ballot types, is because we have over 430 political districts of boundary lines that overlap one another across the entire county. And we all vote for potentially different congressional districts, city council districts, city offices, special districts, fire protection districts, healthcare districts, state assembly, state senate. I think I already said congressional board of supervisors out there. When you overlap all those different boundary lines, it creates, for this upcoming election, it's going to create 842 ballot types for this upcoming election. So we have to factor that in as we're trying to manage the upcoming election. Of course, when I think about that 842 for all of you, the fact that we have to support 5 federally covered languages, Spanish, Filipino, Vietnamese, Chinese, as well as English, when we're conducting this election. So the complexity just gets that much greater in terms of preparing for the election. That's why it takes years to prepare for the election. So what did the state do? The state, as I mentioned before, the governor issued 2 executive orders. The first was every voter is going to get a mail ballot. Second is, yes, there will be a requirement for polling places to be out there, but he added another option for us elections officials, and that's the one that you can see here, which is the more highly concentrated, consolidated form of conducting an election that's out there, and then additional requirements for a voter to track their ballot that we have to offer for every voter should they choose to. And again, the legislature came right behind the governor's executive orders and passed 2 bills, Senate Bill 423 and AB 860, solidifying how the state was reacting and responding to the pandemic and our ability to conduct an election on behalf of all of you. I won't go into any necessary details about those 2 bills because we will get to some of those here in a split second in these slides. This is really the summary of what you can expect of what our options were and what voters should expect. First, again, let me reinforce, every voter will receive a mail ballot. There's been notions that every everyone is going to be receiving a mail ballot. That's incorrect. Every registered voter is going to be receiving a mail ballot. And if I wanted to be more technical, it's every active registered voter out there. What you also have is that you have now 3 options available to a menu of items, an additional item for our office. And for us, it's that second one that I've already spoken about. That was key for us in terms of our ability to conduct this election in some type of meaningful way for all of you that was actually realistic. And then voter education campaign, although it's a requirement, know that this is the largest campaign effort in terms of getting voter education and voter information out that we've ever conducted throughout the entire county. And this is just one aspect of getting our message and informing voters and educating voters about what these changes are. This is what March's elections looks like. In the blue is how we're going to be conducting the election. So you can see what the differences are, but as I mentioned, our county is really used to voting by mail. As you can see here, for March's election, 74% of the electorate were in that election signed up permanently to receive a mail ballot. We're now at 76.5% turnout, not turnout, but 76.5% of our voters are signed up to be a permanent mail ballot voters. That leaves 23.5% that normally or have to go to the polling place to vote should they want to exercise their right to vote. So I don't want to discount that 23.5%. And the reason why is because when you think about 23.5% of 1.84 million registered voters, that's still hundreds of thousands of voters that are out there. So regardless of whether or not our folks are used to voting by mail in our county, yes, the majority of are voting by mail and know about voting by mail and how to do it appropriately. We want to make sure our message is getting out to every single registered voter out there, including those that are not voting by mail, that now will receive a mail ballot. After that, if you think about these polling places, 1,548, will now consolidating more heavily these polling places and precincts into specific sites, what we call super poll sites. But as opposed to running for one day, like it was in March's election, just election day, these locations will now be open for a 4-day period. Let me just repeat myself, quadruple the amount of time that these locations will be open. So there's trade-offs. As opposed to having so many of these precincts, we're now consolidated to 235, but as opposed to having just one day, you now have an opportunity to exercise it across a 4-day period between October 31st through November 3rd. That distributes voters across those 4 days is what the goal is, should you go and want to vote at a polling place as opposed to your mail ballot. We will have 124 mail ballot drop-off locations. That's double the amount of mail ballot drop-off locations that we had in March's election, and quadruple the amount of time that they are going to be operational. As soon as we release mail ballots out there to the U.S. Postal Service, the following day we will have 124 plus staffed mail ballot drop-off locations across the entire county. All of the county libraries, all of the city libraries that are out there. Please thank your librarian for serving as a mail ballot drop-off locations that is out there. So great partners on the library side to having us use it. But we'll also have YMCAs, recreation centers, community centers as mail ballot drop-off locations for voters to drop off their mail ballot. Now, there's been a lot of conversations about the U.S. Postal Service about their viability and timeliness from a national scale. You may be hearing that. Let me just say for you is that I have zero concern about our U.S. Postal Service being able to manage the outbound as well as the inbound capacity of getting your mail ballot to you or back to us after you have voted your mail ballot. But if you have concerns, know that there are outlets. There are options on the table, including these mail ballot drop-off locations, which you can find on sdvote.com, which is our website. How is it going to be different in terms of polling places? As opposed to needing 9,000 poll workers, because we're super consolidating these polling places now, that runs for 4 days, we only need around, I don't want to say only, we now need 3,500 to 3,600 individuals to participate in this election. As opposed to it being volunteer, however, we now will be paying these individuals a salary, an hourly salary, anywhere from $14.25 to $18 per hour to serve in that capacity, creating, again, certainty. And not only, again, is it a volunteer that is for 1 day, but we need an individual to commit to approximately 9 days, upwards of 9 days. Why? The 4 days when we go live across October 31st through November 3rd. But as opposed to attending a 2-hour on-site training, we now will require a 2-day level of training. Then there's site setup as well as breakdown the following day after the November 3rd election. And then for some folks, we'll have to go to the actual respective site to receive all the equipment that we're going to be delivering to every single one of the 235 polling super poll locations that are out there. One key aspect in this election is that every voter will still be assigned a polling place to go to. You cannot just go to any one of the 235. You still are going to be assigned. Voters are used to being assigned a polling place. You will still be assigned. But because we have fewer of them, high likelihood that your polling place has changed. So take note of that. Your polling place most likely has changed in this upcoming election, and it will be printed on the back of your sample ballot and voter information guide. Okay, and then I'll get into the campaign that we're currently moving forward with. So as I mentioned to you, our strength is in voting by mail because voters have preferred and have only increased the total number of people voting by mail. We're now, I gave you the 76.5% of the electorate is a permanent mail ballot voter, but over 70% of all votes cast in an election is by mail. So our strength is in this respective area. I don't see any issues with our ability to manage it, not from our stakeholders like the U.S. Postal Service, or our ability to count your ballots and to do it accurately and in a timely fashion. And most of, as you all know, is that we have most of those mail ballots either counted and released at 8 p.m. or subsequent to the election when many of you dropping them off at your respective polling place or at a mail ballot drop-off locations. I want you to focus really on the three last points in this slide, though, is that for you, know that there are other options. We have introduced in the March election this system called a remote accessible vote by mail system, which was tailored for military and overseas voters, as well as voters with disabilities. But now that's been expanded to all voters. What is the system? It's the ability to get your ballot by email, you mark it on screen, and then you return it through the mail. You sign, of course, all the respective documents so we can verify that it is you that is voting this ballot that you've received through the email. Where I see this really being used, though, is when it's too late to go your mail ballot to get to you through the U.S. Postal Service. So like 7 days in advance of election day, as opposed to the 29th day in advance of the election. Know that our office is going to be able to process ballots much more sooner than we had in the past. What I mean by that is we've always had the ability to, once we receive a mail ballot back from a voter, to verify the signature on the ballot against the signature of their registration form or the document that we have for them in our system. But that's as far as we could get until the 14th day before the election. On that 14th day, then we can start extracting all the validated ballots and scan them into our system. But now we're able to do it 29 days in advance. So effectively, on October 5th, the following day, October 6th, if we get a returned voted ballot, we're able to go through the entire cycle with that ballot and get it into our tabulation, so long as we do not release results until 8 p.m. on election day. And that final point that you can see there is that if there's any concerns with the timeliness of the U.S. Postal Service of getting back your mail ballot to us, the legislature has stepped in and said, look, so long as the ballot is postmarked on election day and received within 17 days, that ballot is a timely cast ballot. They've added effectively 14 days to the normal 3-day window, so for a total of 17 days that we can consider a ballot as timely cast. So long, again, operative term here, as long as it is postmarked by election day. So what is in-person voting going to look like then? The biggest change there is that when you if you're going to get to a polling place, you'll see that there's a higher and expanded level of technology. We will now introduce a system called an electronic poll book. And there is not just going to be one of them, but it's going to be 7 of them. So when you check in, you're not just going to check in at one station. You could have potentially 7 stations on average throughout the entire county that you could check into. Again, to create the efficiency and flow that we need so that there's no overcrowding that's going on that could potentially spread the virus. So that's one. Because we're consolidating more heavily, we're going to have, on average, 15 people as opposed to 4 people at a normal traditional polling place. We'll now have 15 individuals that will be serving at these respective sites, particularly on election day. We'll stagger it the days leading up to it, as I mentioned, where these places will be open for a 4-day period. All 15 will be working on election day, and then we'll stagger staff depending on need on the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday timeframe. So know that as a result of these electronic poll books, the total number that we see of individuals voting a provisional ballot, I believe, will go down because we have now the capacity and be able to see the transparency of the disposition of every single mail ballot, which is also the safeguard to ensure that no one person is double voting in an election, because the system will recognize whether or not we've already received a person's mail ballot and have counted it. Okay. But again, as much focus as I've talked about with the in-person, again, our focus of Vote Safer San Diego is to vote that mail ballot. So what does that look like for all of you? As you can see here, that's the traditional model of all of what the precincts looks like across the entire county. And then when we move towards consolidating, once we know all of the contests that will be on the ballot, which we now know, we're now consolidating those boundary lines together. And then once we're able to do that, we're now able to place where all of the strategic sites need to be in terms of these super poll locations that are out there. Voter outreach campaign, I'm just going to go quickly because I don't want to, I'm probably running short here on time. Michelle, just keep me honest. We sent out, every part of the campaign was every voter received this mailer that we sent out. We wanted to make sure that we were touching every single registered voter in our county. We sent out this mailer in early August. Those of you should have received this. This was translated across the other 4 federally covered languages that I've mentioned already. What it was is a primer of how the changes are. We needed to make sure, as I mentioned before, no surprises for voters, how to interact with our office, how to interact with the election system that we were going to conduct for the upcoming election. The fact that everyone's going to receive a mail ballot, the fact that there will be fewer locations and your polling location will change if you want to vote at the respective, your assigned polling place. For us, it's about curbing, again, the pandemic. So why would a person need to use a polling place, their assigned polling place? For us, it's use the polling place if you demand that experience or want that experience, need that experience, because that's tradition. That's okay. It's okay to do so. But also there are going to be, we know that there are going to be folks that didn't receive their mail ballot, and so they need to get to a polling place. We know that voters will make a mistake on their mail ballot, and so they need a replacement mail ballot. And so that's where there are opportunities to vote at your assigned polling place. And then lastly, there are going to be individuals that have not registered on time, and there is a law for a person to be able to register and vote same day, called same day registration. So those folks will need to get to one of their respective sites to get to be able to register and vote that same day without necessarily coming all the way to Kearney Mesa or on campus to the Registrar of Voters to vote. Okay. One of the key pieces of sending everyone a mail ballot, and to do that in safeguarding the system as well, is that we've listed on the back of the mailer your residence address and your mailing address if that was if you have a mailing address, particularly in the rural areas. So we're asking all voters to validate that information, because again, we need that information in advance of us sending all that data to our mailing house to start printing and packaging all the mail ballots to then get it out by October 5th. So this is a really important key message for us, is we need the most up-to-date information of every single registered voter out there. This is also a key piece to keep our voter registration clean as well. And then lastly, we're asking voters to sign up to receive your sample ballot and voter information guide by email. It's a contactless way. It actually saves money too, if you think about it from a taxpayer point of view. But it's a contactless way if you get your sample ballot and voter information guide by email. And that's what we're asking voters to sign up. As of this week, we have approximately 40,000 people that have already signed up, which has been great in terms of people signing up. 40 days in advance of the election, which is going to be September 24th, we will start releasing and sending out either by email or snail mail your sample ballot and voter information guide. Again, we're reinforcing this message. Every voter is going to receive a mail ballot. Vote it. Vote Safe for San Diego. Okay, that's out there. And then on October 5th, as I mentioned before, on October 5th, voters should start seeing their mail ballots that week. Okay, now it'll take time to get to them, to folks, but it'll start getting out to folks starting October 5th. In fact, just to ensure the timeliness and the capacity of the U.S. Postal Service, we're actually going to be delivering mail ballots to the U.S. Postal Service a couple of days in advance of October 5th, but all of them by October 5th. Okay. We just have a really strong relationship with our local representatives here at the U.S. Postal Service, not just for this election, but over multiple elections. And the mere fact is the U.S. Postal Service is inextricably linked to the Registrar Voters Office, not just by way of mail ballots, but by way of keeping our voter registration files clean. And this whole notion on a national discussion about their viability and timeliness, just know we're not hearing it on our side. And for us, as well as our local representative, it's business as usual. What is business as usual? Our recommendation for voters is return your mail ballots 7 days in advance of election day, right, to vote it and get it back to us through the U.S. Postal Service. It's postage paid. The return envelope that we provide you is postage paid and has the I voted sticker as well. So all of these other services that U.S. Postal Service have, the fact that there is informed delivery, you can now subscribe through the U.S. Postal Service and get an image of what's going to be in your mailbox through your inbox. And so you know in advance of what's going to be that mailbox. I've subscribed. I know when my mail ballot is going to be in my mailbox to be able to retrieve it. The fact that there are thousands of blue boxes, that I call it, out there in the county, use those. They are your trusted source of returning your mail ballot. Much more convenient than the 124 locations that we will have out there, that you can return it throughout the entire county. And you can simply go to their website to find out where the closest blue box is, or you probably know where it is because you probably step outside your house and can just drop your mail ballot because you know where that mail ballot drop box is, or the drop-off box is. We have a tracking system, a service called Where's My Ballot. You now can get push notifications of when the ballot's going to go through the U.S. Postal Service to you, and then also when you voted it and send it back through the mail to get it back to our office. We've always had the system in place for us where you could see, go to our website, type in a couple of pieces of information, find out when your ballot was sent or mailed and when we've received it back. Now you can get push notifications by going to our website, sdvote.com. There's this logo here that you would see, or icon, Where's My Ballot, subscribe. And now you can get text messages or emails as to where is that life cycle of your mail ballot as it's getting to us or it's getting to you. That's out there. It's a new feature, and I would ask all of you to subscribe. It's, again, another way to make sure that your vote is going to be counted. I've listed a plethora of dates that are out there, but these are the key dates that you should be aware of. I will be sending the slide deck to Elizabeth or someone in the organization to get this information out to you. But know that these are the respective key dates that are out there for this upcoming, at least from my perspective. Okay, the last slide, I promise, the last slide, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions. You have some homework here. We're asking all of you, whether or not it's your family, your friends, your neighbors, or any other organization that you belong to get this message out to all of them. It's so important right now. There's so much misinformation. We're taking thousands of calls to really correct course on voters' notions of what's happening out there with the elections for this upcoming election. They're hearing a lot that's happening. You know, there's videos out there that are going viral that really have no bearing or not even factually correct about this upcoming election and how San Diego County is conducting its election, because they're seeing it from another jurisdiction across the entire country. So it's key to really talk with everyone that you know about how this election is going to be conducted. We always have a robust turnout in this in a presidential general election. The last presidential general election, we had an 81.5% turnout. The last average for the last 4 presidential general elections has been a 79.5% turnout. So we know that I expect that we'll have no less than a 79.5% turnout. And the key for me is going to be, will we overcome the 84% turnout, the highest turnout that we've ever seen in our county during that 2008 presidential general election in this upcoming election? Seems like the country is very polarized. There's a lot of energy, a lot of fuel stoking this upcoming election. So this is the time that I expect the voters will have their voices be made known through the ballot box. But let me just say, again, vote safer San Diego. Vote your mail ballot. Good practices of voting a part of the Vote Safe San Diego campaign, which is when you vote that mail ballot, mark it clearly, fill in that bubble with an ink pen, sign it, seal it, and return it to a trusted source. And the trusted sources for us is us, any one of our mail ballot drop-off locations, any one of the SuperPolls locations, or through the U.S. Postal Service that is out there. There's concerns about ballot harvesting out there. It is, for me, a pejorative term, because there's nothing illegal about it, so long as there's no ill intent or criminal activity with a person collecting a mail ballot and returning it back to our office, that they're going to have some type of compromising of it or not get it back to us on time. So again, sign it, seal it, return it back to a trusted source, clearly mark that ballot, and again, vote that mail ballot as opposed to, and use only the polling places as an alternative to voting that mail ballot. I've said a lot, I've been quick, be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vu, Michael, for all of that very comprehensive presentation. I think you already answered almost all of the questions that we had written up in advance. Seriously, yeah. So one of the key things I think I'm already a mail ballot voter myself. And so I'm always thinking about, okay, what is that cutoff date of when I need to get the ballot in the mail? I believe you just said about a week in advance is the rule of thumb, but to, always to keep in mind that we can drop off our ballots. It doesn't have to be through the mail service, correct?
That's correct. You don't have. That's exactly right. There's, if you will, lifelines for voters. There's the U.S. Postal Service, but if it's too short of time frame that you think, because it's inside that 7 days, you can certainly drop it off at any one of the 124 plus staffed drop-off locations. I should say that these are staff locations, or at any one of the 235 SuperPolls locations that will start operating on October 31st. So you've got 3 lifelines, maybe a 4th lifeline, which would be at our office directly. So yes, you could do that. I should mention this because I haven't really mentioned this before, but if you're in another county, you actually could drop off your mail ballot in another county in the state, and the registrar in that respective county is legally obligated to get that ballot to us.
Okay, and
Again,
I believe
that's
you
in the
said
state. Sorry,
and I
Michelle.
believe you said that there's even, oh no, sorry, that there's even an adjustment that now the state will give us 17 days after the election. So we shouldn't worry as much about those deadlines necessarily.
Yes, so long as the ballot is postmarked by election day and received within 17 days. Again, I think you have to couple those 2 requirements together. Yeah.
Okay, so I know we're very short on time, but thank you so much for all of that information. And I know people can go to sdvote.com for more information.